Cześć, hello, witam, and welcome to Pierogi to Prayer, the official podcast of St. Joseph's Polish Apostolate of the Diocese of Camden, coming to you from our historic home at 1010 Liberty Street in Camden, New Jersey, the heart of South Jersey's Polonia for over 130 years. I am your host, Michael Matalevich. This month will mark the final episode in our first incredible season. As with any project who meets a threshold such as this, it is a time for reflection and to consider how far we've come, as well as what the future may hold, eager to build on our successes and learn from our failures. In thinking back to the genesis of our show, and as it relates to the topic of our episode today, it was the beginning of a journey into a world that few of us at the apostolate fully understood. On the surface, it seemed pretty straightforward. Podcasting was a modern way to accomplish what we had already been doing for over a century, with little initial costs and equipment. Yet as production progressed, it became clear that a myriad of small decisions would have to be made that may have long-lasting impacts on our success and our reception. Within the midst of subject research, software choice, and conducting interviews, an immediate decision had to be made on a matter that may seem somewhat trivial, but that was nonetheless rather important. This choice was what sort of theme music to begin each of our episodes with. Should it be upbeat and catchy, solemn and traditional? What we did know was that it had to convey a certain set of principles. First of all, it had to be Polish. Secondly, it had to reflect our past and culture. And thirdly, it had to be pretty recognizable and captivating to draw the listener in. The music we chose is a type that is recognizable to so many, even if they don't know the particular name of the piece. Yet the odds are that they will know the name of its composer, whose remarkable life and music is the subject of our episode today. The Grande Valse Brillante in E flat major, Opus 18, and I apologize if I butchered that, was composed by Fryderyk Chopin in 1833. In his commentary on the piece for the Fryderyk Chopin Institute, the author Mieczysław Tomaszewski notes that, among other things, this piece, quote, shimmers with the gaiety of elegant society. And, quoting another reviewer in his article, it deserves to hasten its way onto pianos whose rests are not in the least bit accustomed to holding vulgar music. It should be danced, at the very least, by countesses. Such has been the reputation of the music produced by the beloved Polish maestro Fryderyk Chopin. His music, and the emotion it carries, has made it the backdrop for cinema and radio, affairs of state, and above all, the musical voice of the Polish people. Yet I would hazard a guess that even most Poles, and Polish Americans for that matter, are not familiar with the details of his life, or could explain the stylistic elements that make it so appealing and iconic. For this show, the last of our first season, and during our first Polish-American Heritage Month, which takes place in October, we have a very special program indeed, with a renowned expert on this very subject. Dr. Michael Klein, although, as you will immediately hear, he would rather humorously spurn that professional title, is a professor of music studies at Temple University, as well as an accomplished pianist and writer. As you are about to hear, Chopin and his music have been central to his life as a musician and teacher. We took our show on the road for this interview, so Dr. Klein could show us in person the elements of Chopin's music that make him unique in his very own home studio. Unfortunately, we encountered some problems with our audio equipment, and the interview was recorded on our backup system, i.e., my iPhone. But with the magic of modern editing, it came through in what might best be described as not altogether terrible, but you can definitely hear it. But no matter. I'm sure you will enjoy this delightful, at times humorous, at other times moving, and above all, greatly informative discussion on the greatest gift Poland has given to the world of music. No matter if you know a great deal about music or not, I'm sure that you will enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Before we get started, one editorial note. Just like last month's September episode on World War II, Due to the length of our interview, we've divided this month's show into 2 parts as well, which will be released immediately, one after the other, with our Polish Saint of the Month reflection at the very end of part 2. Please feel free to listen to them back to back or separately at your leisure. For now, step back in time to the mid-1800s, at least metaphorically, to a time when Fryderyk Chopin was writing his music that you will hear throughout our episode, and giving his legacy to the world.
Dr. Michael Klein.
You can just call
Professor
me Michael.
Well, but kind of for an official.
Yeah. I'm not a real doctor, as most people. Is there a doctor?
Run and
Is
save.
there a doctor
save a life.
now? Yes, I'm a doctor. He's doomed.
But Professor of Music Studies. At
That's
Temple
right.
University.
Very
correct?
good. Yep.
And so you teach courses in music theory and
in film, actually.
Film,
So
okay.
I teach film, music, and music theory. And I was trained as a pianist. Sorry to already go into this.
No, it's fine.
But I would say for most pianists, Chopin is the center of their world. You can't imagine being a pianist who doesn't play Chopin.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the Chopin competition is coming up in October. Every 4 years in Poland, they have a competition where people bash away, and you go, "That's not the way Chopin played the piano." But that's it. Yes, but anyway.
yeah. But actually, this episode is going to come out in October.
Oh, there you
So
go.
it'll be perfect timing.
It'll be perfect. It'll be perfect. So
Yeah, because October is it's the end of our first season. This has been a year. Because October is Polish American Heritage Month.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
So-
and a lot of times there's also this sense of hero worship that comes to Polish personalities where you don't look at their full lives and things, which I kind of have a problem with as a historian.
Right.
Because that was my background. So how did you? So what was your interest in piano? Like, where did it kind of start?
So my parents. Oh well, first of all, my grandmother played the piano. By the time I was born, and by the time we were going to my grandmother's house, she no longer played, but the piano was there, and I always messed around on it. And then my mom got a piano. This like tells you what life was like back in the late 60s, early 70s. There was a piano down the street, and they literally pushed it down the street. And why bother with piano movers? You know?
Right, yeah.
Push this piano down the street into our house, and then I messed around with that piano, and finally my dad was like, this is before my dad passed, but my dad was like, you got to get that kid some piano lessons. Because I was just like, doing this all day, and he was like, I want to hear a real tune. So, and I loved it. I got picked on mercilessly, but I didn't care. I mean, at school, it's like I wasn't playing football or baseball, I was playing the piano, and they were like, what's the matter with this kid? I'm like, I don't know. I like playing the piano. So, I think 8 when this all started. Then I got, the only way to become really good at an instrument is to be, backing up. My wife plays for the Pops, and in a recent concert, the conductor said, don't they all sound good? And, the audience said yes. And you know why they sound good? Because while you guys were out playing, they were in solitary confinement, playing their instruments. And basically, that's how you become good. And I basically was in solitary confinement in my bedroom where they put the piano because they're like sick of hearing me practice. And I basically practiced all the time. And then I got into Eastman, and then things change. You think you're going to be a pianist, and then you find out, 5 million people can play better than you can. And you're like, okay, so I'll do something else. And that's how I ended up teaching theory and film music at Temple. So that's the quick quick story.
Yeah.
But I played a ton of Chopin growing up, just a ton of it. So
yeah, and so I guess just for kind of listeners who might not be musically inclined, so music theory. So how would you kind of explain that part of the discipline?
Music theory, the quickest way I can put that is like music theory is sort of the grammar of music. So I remember reading just a short blurb where someone asked online in some forum, why can't we get people to write like Mozart? well, we can. I can get all of my students, if they do exactly what I tell them to do, I can get them to sound like Mozart. We know all the rules. We know exactly what he did. But who wants to live in a world where every single piece sounds like Mozart? It might be like living in a world where every single pop song sounds like the Beatles. And after a while, you'd be like, okay, I've had it with the Beatles now. Can we do something else? So up until a point, we can get, and that's what we do. We try to show students how the music is put together. And there's a lot of composition involved where, well, we're going to make you, I want you to write a piece. In fact, since we're doing Chopin, let's write a short prelude like Chopin might have written one. And then, we teach them how that music is put together. They hate it. It's great. They hate it. But some don't. But yeah, but I love teaching it. So.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, I mean, so that's great. And let's just pretend I'm kind of one of your students. Okay. and we're talking about Chopin for the first time.
Okay. Right.
So kind of give me the pitch, I guess, or not the
this would be a theory pitch, I guess, if I were trying to explain to someone, Chopin. Like the first thing I might say is that it's hard to overestimate the place that Chopin has in Polish culture and Polish society. So and then if I were talking to students, I'd have to explain some of this, but like Adam Mickiewicz is the great poet of Poland in the 19th century, and Chopin is the great composer of the 19th century, and Kosciuszko, General Kosciuszko, is like the great military leader of the 19th century, and I would sometimes tell students, there's a statue of Kosciuszko in downtown Philadelphia because he helped the Revolutionary War. And after that, in Polish culture and music, although we have Szymanowski and later Lutosławski, those two, as great as they are, none of them have ever reached the height of Chopin in like the Polish imaginary. A story I often tell people about just where Chopin is in Polish society. I had there's another Polish composer named Witold Lutosławski, and I was invited to a conference in Warsaw or Warszawa. A friend of mine said, have you ever been to the Povansky cemetery? And I never had been. And he said, well, we have to go. And so he brings me, and there's one Polish musician after another is buried there. And he goes, oh, I have to show you something. And he brings me to this little area, and there's the name Chopin. And I said, and with flowers all over the place. And I said, well, but Chopin wasn't buried here. He was buried in France. And he said, look more carefully. And I looked, and it was Chopin's parents. And to this day, Poles bring flowers to Chopin's parents' grave to thank you for creating this, And I was, to be honest with you, I choked up. I just couldn't believe it. And I said, well, the government must do this. And he goes, no, government doesn't have to do this. They do it on their own. So on the other side, sorry to start at the end, kind of, Chopin's body is buried in Père Lachaise, which is in Paris. And every great French thinker and person is buried there. And they say, by far, the site that has the most people is Chopin. And it's all Poles. It's all Polish people who gather around this, Meanwhile, Descartes, it's like there's one poor French philosopher who's like, oh, Descartes. But, the rest...
You're taking too young.
Yeah, that's right. But everyone else is like, I got to go to Chopin's grave. So he looms very large in Polish culture. And some of that comes from, he took Polish dances like the mazurka and the polonaise, and he made them, he created music that others could hear. So instead of having to go to a Polish village and watch a mazurka, he wrote mazurkas for the piano, so anyone could sit down and play a mazurka. The same with the polonaise. Those are the two distinctly Polish things that he wrote. But he wrote something close to, it depends on how you divide it up, but about 15 volumes of piano music, and he died when he was 39. So he's sort of a Mozart figure in terms of pure ability. He took to the piano, not like me, more than this. He took to the piano figuring out, like triads of 3 notes that sound good together, figuring those out like when he was 5. And by the time he was 12, even the best piano teacher in Warsaw, which is where they sent him, said, I don't have anything else to teach him. So by 12, this is like stunning to me. There's no pianist I know that at 12 they're done. So at 12, he knew how to play anything that was written for the piano. And we have a set of etudes that he wrote. He wrote those etudes to teach himself how to play harder things, because there was nothing else harder that he could find that, and he wanted to. I just, like, that just blows my mind. Like, oh, you know what? I think I'll write some things that are hard for the piano so that I could be a better pianist.
Yeah.
Like, and those etudes up until then, this is after Chopin, but etudes up until then on the piano are like, you're not going to go out on stage and say, you know what, I'm going to play the hand in etude number 1, and people will be like, why? So, the Chopin etudes, they're pieces of music.
Yeah.
And they sound beautiful. And Liszt went wild when he first saw these etudes. He was just like, oh my God, etudes. You mean you can write etudes that you can play in public? And then he writes his own, and Chopin's like, nah, yours are bad. Mine are good. But yeah, so pretty much everything he touched became cool. And he brought Polish culture into France. So
there's this sense of Chopin as this hero of Poland, and, but he also had this kind of he was French Polish.
Yeah.
His father had moved to Poland, from what I understand.
Yep, that's right.
And then his mother was Polish, so that's what a lot of people see the name Chopin. It's like, well, that's not Chopinski or what have you.
Yeah.
But then he immigrated to Paris, or to France,
That's
and
right.
then he really took on this Polish persona in somewhat exile, and that was the pattern. Poland had not existed for 120, or did not exist for 123 years.
That's right.
And right in the aftermath of the November Uprising, he had kind of just left, I think, and from what I remember.
I'm a
historian.
I'm turning this podcast over to you.
No, but it's and that's what. So the Polish story in exile during this time is one that I'm fascinated in as a historian, and as a Pole,
right?
And so how he kind of used that to infuse his music. That's kind of an interesting topic for me, at least.
So just to back up and kind of fill out a bit, you're right. So there was the November Uprising in 1830, I think maybe December, in 1830. Just before that, Chopin had he kind of knew that he wouldn't ever reach international fame. Sorry to say, living in Poland. And he was 20 years old at the time. He was already the most famous living musician in Poland. He had already written 2 piano concertos. He had written a number of very difficult works. He had started writing these etudes that I talked about. He had written some mazurkas, which are Polish dances, from Mazovia, which is where a small village he was born, which is northwest of Warsaw. But he had gone to school in Warsaw. His father was French, moved to Poland to teach French, and then his mother was Polish. He thought of himself as a Pole. He did not think of himself as half French, half Polish. He thought of himself as Polish. So he wanted to stay in Poland, and everyone around him was like, you have to get out. It's going to get bad. And sure enough, within less than 30 days of him leaving Poland, there was this failed revolution. And a lot of the intelligentsia were murdered by the Russians. A number of great Polish heroes were murdered. Aristocratic homes were taken over. And Poland, there was like even though there was what we called the tripartition in the end of the 18th century between where Poland was divided. I don't think many people know this who aren't Polish, where Poland disappeared from the map. I know I'm telling you things you already know,
but it's
Russia took over part of Poland, Prussia took over part of Poland, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire took part of Poland. But there was this one little center part around Warsaw that was semi-autonomous. And after this failed uprising, that disappeared too. And so the Russians basically, Warsaw and East, they basically controlled everything. And so it was hard to be Polish. So Chopin left right before all this happened. And there were a number of Poles who had the means left Poland. They mostly went to France because France, they were sympathetic to the Polish cause. There was always this, it's funny because I look at what's happening now between the US and its relationship to Ukraine, right? And there were all these promises the French made about, well, we're going to help you get Poland back, but they never made good on any of those promises. So there was constant diplomatic talk about, well, how can we get Poland back? But it just never came to be. And you said 120 years, and just for your listeners, and you can correct me, it really isn't until World War I, after World War I, that Poland becomes an independent country again. And one of its prime ministers, not right away, is the pianist Paderewski, who was a Chopin expert. So for a while, Poland is being run by a pianist, which I just can't imagine getting up and saying, I'm a pianist and I want to run America.
Yeah.
And Americans going, yeah, you go. They'd be like, what?
Yeah.
So Chopin brings this kind of Polish heart with him, introduces Polish music in his own style to Parisians. The culture then was what we call salon culture. So Chopin only played about 20 concerts, public concerts, in his life, his entire life. This is unlike Liszt, who's playing a concert every night. Chopin just did not like playing in front of 1,000 people or 500 people or 200 people. There were salon culture was basically what you think of, an aristocratic house that's got an enormous room in it with a piano, and after people eat, they might say, and he didn't know if he'd be asked, but he always was asked, to Chopin, will you play the piano? Well, sure. And he would just improvise. He would just improvise for hours on end. And if he stopped, they'd say, no, keep going. They were just stunned that he could just, and apparently he would ask give me a tune. And he would improvise on the tune. Often he would go to these Polish places that openly wanted to have Polish people in it, and they would give him a tune from Poland, and he would improvise on that, often bringing people to tears. So Polish culture was part of everything he thought of when he was writing music. And even when it's not a mazurka or a polonaise, there's some kind of Polish element there almost always. He was apparently one of the most refined people in France. His father insisted on this. His father, being French, was you will have aristocratic manners because otherwise they won't let you in. So his French was impeccable. He had no accent whatsoever. His Polish was also impeccable. He was a horrible speller, apparently. So even spelled his own friends' names incorrectly, in, Dear Jan, and then spelled it the French way, E-I-A-N, and his friends are that's not how you spell my name, So, but he had impeccable manners, and so the French loved him for that, that he wasn't, and if he had he had this nationalist thinking about him, but he didn't throw it in people's faces. And so they also appreciated that. He had this incredible sense of humor that most people don't know about because he had these manners. So Chopin had died basically of tuberculosis. At the end of there's a Chopin Institute actually in Warsaw that you can go to. they have all of this paraphernalia. One of them is a little cartoon, and it's a picture of a woman crying, and the caption reads, "The only woman in Paris who was not by Chopin's side while he died." Because hundreds of people wanted to come and see this famous musician, and they knew he was dying in his apartment. Eventually, they had to be pushed away. I just can't even imagine that. Like I'm trying to think, maybe a pop star today, if their doors were open, hundreds of people might come in.
Mm-hmm.
But at the very end of his life, he's in his bed. He knows he's at the end, and his last words. Someone asked him, "Are you suffering?" And he said in French, "Non plus," no longer. And it. Some people think he was joking. No, I'm not suffering.
Yeah.
Do I look like I'm suffering?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Sarcastic.
Yes, right. Some people think it was like he knew he was at the very end, so the suffering was over. But so this kind of Polishness in him. The people that he felt most comfortable with, even when he was in Paris, were Polish people. He did not travel widely because he was so ill. But when he would travel, if he came across Polish people, he even writes to his friends, "Oh, at last I came across someone Polish, and we could speak Polish." You know what I mean? Like we could, and I could get news about what was happening in Poland and all of this. So even though he had this very refined French attitude about things, he preferred to be among Polish people. That was sort of him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because in kind of promoting our Polish identity, it's the country. You think about Chopin's time, and this pattern of repression and uprisings that had gone through over a century. The Poles, they didn't know a nation that it had existed. Some of them, and then it was every 30 years. So after 1830, I did an episode on the 1863 uprising in January because that's when that happened. And the sort of the stamp constantly, and it's you look at these dates if you're studying history in school or whatever. It's like 1830, 1860, da 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 da. But if you start thinking about it in your contemporary terms, you think of take any historical event. Almost 25 years ago since 9/11. 30 some years ago since the Persian Gulf War, and it's you think those were still in your mind. Those events and how much they've affected us. It was the same thing for Chopin then for a country that was just completely obliterated in so many ways, and to keep pursuing this sense of keeping your nation alive abroad, and how important that was, and in sense of our Poles who have come here, particularly in the turn of the last century, and their world compared to how we see our culture now in a country that was completely upended again during the Second World War in so many ways. I mean, ethnically, etc. And then to try and I think there's a lot of value in sort of overlaying what we know onto a history like that to get a sense of where his mind was. Yeah, right. So I think it's interesting how you mentioned like 9/11 is something that is very deep in the American psyche, and then there are positive things too that are deep in the psyche, like we just passed the date when we landed on the moon, right? And that was like this. I remember that. I was a little kid. My dad made me stay up until midnight, and I was like, I don't know what I'm looking at, but apparently it's very important, But then there are other things like the Challenger disaster that when if people are alive, then that stays in their psyche. Imagine, but America is still. I mean, America has changed greatly because of many of these things, but there's still a United States of America. But imagine like these things happening, and there really is no Poland. You're just hoping that one day there will be a Poland, and you're holding on to everything you can about what you think is Polish. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Okay. And one thing that they've learned in Polish scholarship. So there are a number of pieces. They're too long, and I wouldn't play one. I'm going to play some other things as we go along. But there are a number of pieces by Chopin that set up a kind of story where Poland is starting to rise, and then all of them end tragically. They all end like, no, this isn't going to happen. And
there was thinking back then, we now know that, and it was kind of revolutionary. They had this idea, the only way for Poland to become free is if there's some great war across all of Europe that redraws the map. They actually thought that in Chopin's time. They kind of knew that one day there would be what we call World War I, and that there would be this great. They didn't think, there were some, that they did not think that Paris or anyone else, or I mean France, was going to go and save Poland. That Poland would only be saved if all of Europe, the map was redrawn. And that would only happen with some horrible event, some horrible warlike event, and that Poland then would rise. The kind of awful thing, I study another composer that I mentioned, Lutosławski. Poland is only free for a couple of decades before Russia comes again, and like drastically tries to change Polish culture. And now you have Poles, Lutosławski, this composer that I work on, he wrote Polish music, and he says, I stuck it in my office desk and thought it will never see the light of day because it was Polish and the Russians weren't going to let it be published, which is very, very sad. And then he lives to see the thaw. There's what we call the Polish thaw in 1956 or 57. And suddenly Polish music comes out again, But just imagine like going from, it's hard for, I think, people in the United States, even though we're still a young country, to imagine that your country kind of ceases to exist. You hold on to its culture. We've got our country at last. And then, here come the Russians. All right. And now Polish culture has to, go underground yet again. So,
and it's just this constant history of resurgence, and like even Napoleon walks through and reestablishes the Duchy of Warsaw, and then Congress of Vienna comes and it's gone. Napoleon essentially was a broken promise. But then you have 1830, and then you have 1865, 3, and and it's like this constant hundreds of years of a country's history, and then it's gone, and then it's this constant trying to get it back. Like, would we have the same spirit here? Were that our case? I don't know.
I often wonder the same thing. Like if somehow the United States were broken up, and then artisans and musicians and people with some kind of means went to other countries, would they hold on to what they think culture of the United States is? I mean, I don't know.
I don't either.
It's hard, and now we're so much more international. People could just be spread to the four corners of the earth and like just never come back. That's a sad thing to talk about.
I know. Let's get a little bit more. So, I mean, I think part of this. So, if you ask someone on the street, I guess the belt, like who they know as a famous composer, it's usually, I would say, Beethoven, Mozart, and Chopin. These are kind of the three.
Chopin is very big.
And so Chopin, I mean, he was somewhat famous in his lifetime. I mean, you said
he's
there were all
very
these
famous.
people. He's very famous in his lifetime. What would you kind of chalk up to this enduring legacy? We've had people, famous composers for generations now who've written these terrific pieces. But Chopin has endured. Why do you suppose that is? Kind of in the popular imagination.
So I'm finally gonna play one or two things to show you. But Chopin is responsible for what we call interiority in the 19th century. If we think even in the United States of Benjamin Franklin and Adams and Jefferson, they led what we call public lives. They didn't stay at home. They were always out in the public, speaking in the public, going to taverns, talking to their friends. This is a kind of the 18th century idea of your life is public and what you think just comes out publicly. And by the way, this is just for men. Women get to stay home and make flags apparently. So, but in the 19th century, suddenly there's this idea of I'm not going to go out in the public because you know what? There was this French Revolution. It wasn't a cool thing, and I'm glad I wasn't out in the streets when this was all happening. And you know what? There was these revolutions in Poland, and you know what? Napoleon went across Europe and destroyed everything. We're just going to stay inside. And Chopin is sort of part of this, but not only are we staying inside, Chopin is exploring what our inner lives are like. and trying to take what that inner life is like and make it into music. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples, even though this first one is not particularly a Polish piece. This is a piece, if you study film music, this piece, which I think most people would recognize if they heard it, it has appeared in hundreds of movies in the background. And the latest one I found was from 2019, although I think there's some others. And in this particular movie, there's a young woman who's like one of the last people on Earth. Earth has it's had its kind of apocalypse. And she has her father's iPod, and she listens to this like every day. It's like the only music she listens to. And it's this famous piece. This tune, this is not about like cannons and, you know what I mean? It's not about the outer world, it's about the inner world. And we get this too, there are some other pieces that are almost every piece. So these mazurkas, oh my God, these mazurkas. Everyone who listens to this should go listen to Chopin's mazurkas. He wrote some 50 of them. A mazurka is supposed to be a kind of rather happy piece. There are three kinds of mazurka, but we don't need to go into that. So here's a kind of public mazurka. It sounds, and you probably could dance to this. Mm-hmm. But then we get, you know, in this same collection, this is one of his most famous mazurkas. To that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's almost like a picture of a waltz, or even, mazurka, or even more like a nostalgic looking back at a mazurka. Like, oh, there was this time, there was this place called Poland. It doesn't exist anymore. But we used to dance this thing called a mazurka. But I'm too sad to tell you what a mazurka really sounds like. All I can do is give it to you through the lens of what I feel right now. So I always get this sense of Chopin's music being, you know, all music we think of as being emotional, but that Chopin's music as being particularly emotional about the inner world, the way I think inside my head somehow comes out in music. So to me, I think we always hear like, well, music speaks to people. Well, yeah, all music speaks to people. I think that for people that love Chopin, it just deeply speaks to, you know, what does sadness really sound like? What does, you know, heroism really sound like? What does Poland sound like? Can we put Poland into music somehow? And Chopin sort of did that. Sort of like, look, this is what Poland sounds like, you know. We're not always a happy people, We're not always a sad people. We live somewhere in the middle. We create things that are special to us. And also for Polish people, again, Adam Mickiewicz, a poet, Chopin, a musician, that these are like the cultural icons for them. And not, of course, I think these are great icons for us, but ours are all kind of political, like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, that these are our cultural heroes, but their cultural heroes, except for like Lech Walesa, their cultural heroes are artists. That's the way I think Polish people think. So,
yeah, it's funny. I'm struck by thinking about the use of Chopin's music in sort of pop culture, or like you said, the movie. I just was remembering this show I was watching, and there's a woman and she's struggling with all these things. Her father dies, and she's a cop, and things going on at work. And someone suggested, he said, "You need to listen to Chopin." And there's this great scene where she's in the gym, and there's all this noise, people lifting weights, and there's rock music playing, etc. And then she's on the treadmill, and then it fades into what she's listening to.
Right.
And it's like a nocturne or something, and everything's quiet. Yeah. And then you can just see it, and it's part of the way that the series develops and all. It's this sort of her thinking about who she is.
Yeah.
And it is like to that quality of introspection that the music sort of instills. What was the word that you used?
Oh yeah, interiority.
Interiority.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take that with me.
Okay, good.
It just does.
Yes, I taught it.
It is. It's just, it sort of does bring something out.
So if you think of, people often think that when I teach and when we teach classical music, it's like, classical music is great, pop music isn't. We don't think that. I love pop music too, but pop music is a public kind of music. People go to a concert with 1,000 other people, and they're all screaming and shouting, and the person that they want to hear is singing their favorites, and then they shout out what they want to hear, and then no, you're not going to hear that till the end because that's my most popular song, So that's a very public thing, even though people, I think, do use pop music as like an inner life. But this music is not meant for that. In fact, we do have stories of this happening to Liszt, of him playing in a big public sphere. There's one famous story of the audience picking him up and carrying him through the streets and shouting, because he's so... Chopin found that very crass. He read that story and was like, oh my God, what a way to make a living. No, this is meant... I'm playing for people to think about what's going on in their lives, and I'm trying to give them a picture of something. Chopin actually appears in lots of other artworks. So one of them, there's a book called The Awakening by Kate Chopin, who's an American. And when I picked it up, I said, I bet you Chopin appears in this book. Well, sure enough, the main character is, it was kind of a scandal. The main character is a woman, and she goes to a party and someone is playing Chopin. And while it's being played, she decides, I'm going to divorce my husband because I want to live this life, like the life of this music, and not the life that he's making me live. And so Chopin kind of lights this fire under this woman, and that's basically what the story is about. One of the most famous novels, ever, is In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. He talks about music for 5,000 pages. He talks about music all over the place. But the very first composer he talks about is Chopin. It's sort of like, I got to get the ball rolling, and the place to get the ball rolling is with Chopin. And then he says something, or he has a character say something that they said in Chopin's time. You have not heard Chopin unless you've heard Chopin play Chopin. So none of us have heard Chopin. I just played notes and did my best, but apparently he had the most wide range of kind of emotional characters and colors that of any pianist. Even Liszt was like, I wish I could play like Chopin. I wish I had that those colors, that ability to bring out, an emotion, to bring out sadness or happiness or whatever. So in some sense, none of us have heard him, but in another sense, he looms very large in our imaginary. And the other thing, what you asked, the original question, like 40 minutes ago, the original question was, why is he still kind of with us? I mean, as I said at the beginning, there is not a pianist I know who doesn't love playing Chopin. All right, maybe one or two. We don't like those people, by the way. If you come across one, just ignore them.
There's always one, isn't there?
There's always one. I really don't like Chopin. You know what? Go away. So, he was sent. That's interesting. This is when he was already in France, and they wanted to draw Chopin back to Poland, and the Tsar sent him a ring, and Chopin was like, "I will not wear this ring. You can send it back," which is. And people were like, "No, don't send it back," And he was like, they said, "If you send it back, you'll never be allowed back in Poland." And he goes, "I don't want to go to Poland unless it's free," So that's quite a thing, I suppose if Putin sent me something, I'd send it back.
Exactly.
I'd be like, these chocolates are probably poison.
Yeah, right.
First of all. Second of all, I don't want anything to do with it. You can have these back. So, but anyway, those are just a couple of things. The films, the creation of interiority, appearing in literature all over the place, every pianist plays him. You can't be a pianist and not, he's still it. No one has come close on the piano. So
We hope you have enjoyed our time thus far on a musical journey through Chopin's life and music with Dr. Michael Klein. Be sure to tune in for part 2 of our interview on this great heritage and history, as well as our Polish Saint of the Month at the end.